David was an ordinary 27-year-old guy. His life was neither too successful nor a failure. In the morning he worked in a small office, doing technical support, and in the evenings he wrote articles for a small online magazine. The topic of his texts was the internet, and he always found interesting things for his readers: unusual sites, little-known services, rare facts. The deeper he delved into the digital world, the more attracted he became to one topic: the dark net. At first glance, it was just a cryptic name for a hidden part of the internet. But the more he read, the more he realized that the dark net is not just sites that cannot be found in ordinary search engines. It was a place where people with a variety of goals, from researchers to criminals, were hiding. Inside this world, illegal substances, weapons, even someone's personal data were being sold. But most of all, David was attracted by rumors about the so-called hidden rooms. These pages could not be found without a special link or code. It was said that the darkest things happened there, which I didn't even want to think about. David decided to write an article about the dark net. But instead of just retelling other people's words, he wanted to see this place in person. He needed something real, shocking, that could hook readers. He installed a Tor browser, bought some bitcoins for secure purchases, and his journey began. At first, everything looked relatively safe. He visited forums where various topics were discussed, from anonymity on the internet to cryptocurrency trading. Most of the people there seemed to be ordinary users who were just interested in privacy. But the deeper he dug, the more strange sites he found. One of them offered creepy videos for money. The other is access to encrypted databases. Another site claimed that it could fulfill any request for a certain amount. But the strangest thing was a site called Gate Zero. It could only be accessed through an invitation. On the registration page, you had to specify your email address and the reason why you wanted to join. David decided to give it a try. He left his work email, wrote that he was interested in technology, and sent a request. A few days passed, and he was already beginning to forget about it, when one night a letter arrived in his mail. "Welcome to Gate Zero, our newest member. Please follow the link to activate your account. Remember, your actions are strictly confidential." The site turned out to be surprisingly simple. White background, black text, several links. But inside there was a huge archive of videos and photos. Most of them seemed fake, created for shock or entertainment. However, some of them made David uneasy. One video showed a man in a black mask sitting in an empty room with blood-stained walls. He was talking about some kind of game that only those who leave their contacts will be able to play soon. David's interest turned into an obsession. He started returning to the site every night, studying everything that was published there. And one day he found a folder called "Those Who Went Too Far." The folder, "Those Who Went Too Far," turned out to be password protected. Instead of the standard key entry field, there was an encrypted message: "The password is in your past, if you're careful enough." At first, David thought it was a joke or another marketing ploy to whet interest. But later, scrolling through the details in his head, he remembered that in one of the first letters from Gate Zero there was a strange set of characters, X84T7HT5E3 access. He decided to give it a try. To his surprise, the password came up. Opening the folder, David saw a list of files with dates that ran at intervals of several months. The names were not descriptive, just combinations of letters and numbers, but one entry immediately caught his attention. The file was called G72_observer_live.mp4, and the download date was the same as today. The video turned out to be a live broadcast. The camera was installed in a dark room lit only by a desk lamp. There were surgical-looking instruments on the table, and a laptop was next to it. Someone appeared in the frame, a tall man in a black hoodie with a hood pulled down over his face. The man spoke in a flat, monotonous voice. Congratulations, you entered the circle. Now you're an observer. Every observer has the right to choose. But remember, if you look into the abyss one day, she will look at you too. At that moment, an inscription appeared on the screen: confirm participation to continue. There were 2 buttons under it: confirm and log out. David hesitated. My heart was pounding, and my palms were damp. He knew it wasn't just a game, but he also couldn't bring himself to leave. Curiosity overcame fear. He clicked confirm. The screen blinked and the broadcast continued. Now the camera was showing another room. A girl was sitting on the floor, tied to a metal chair. Her hands were tied, her mouth was taped, and her eyes were glistening with tears. A timer appeared in the left corner of the screen, counting down 30 minutes. The man's voice rang out again, but now it sounded through a text message on the screen: you have a choice, intervene or stay away. Observers, as a rule, do not interfere. But if you decide to go further, the consequences will be yours. There was a phone with a headset connected on the table next to the girl. An instruction appeared at the bottom of the screen: to stop this, call the number. But be prepared that we will come for you. David froze. He understood that this was not a production. There was real fear in the girl's eyes, and there was blood on her neck, not so much to cause serious harm, but enough to scare. He tried to take a screenshot, but the file turned out to be protected. Then he grabbed the phone, intending to call the police. But as soon as he opened the app, his laptop screen blinked. New inscription: we're watching you. Step in and you will become a participant. David felt cornered. He could have just turned off the computer and left, but the idea of leaving the girl in danger seemed unbearable. David took a deep breath, trying to collect his thoughts. He was trying to understand how far those who created this site had gone and how real their threats were. His heart was pounding and his hands were barely moving when he returned to the keyboard. The words on the screen seemed frozen, as if they were waiting for his next move. He decided to stall for time. Maybe we can find something else that will help us figure out how to get out of this situation. Clicking on the tabs of the site, he opened another folder called Observer Stories. Inside were short text files with descriptions of situations that were coldly terrifying. Observer's letter #X17. I didn't interfere. I thought it was just a joke. But 3 days later, they sent me a video of what happened next. The girl died, and a note was found on her body: you'll pay more attention next time. Now I can't sleep. I think I hear footsteps in the hallway every night. Participant Report G05. I called. They found me a week later. This is not a joke, not a game. Everything you see is real. If you're reading this, don't do what I did. Leave everything as it is. David felt sweat break out on his skin. Someone actually paid to participate, someone tried to help, and no one came out of it whole. He closed the folder and returned to the broadcast. There were 15 minutes left on the screen. A hooded man was sitting at a table cleaning one of the knives. Suddenly he looked straight at the camera, as if he knew David was watching. Then he raised his hand and made a gesture as if pointing his finger directly at him. A new inscription appeared on the screen: do you think you can trick us? We see everything. Come on, make your choice. An unknown number rang on David's phone. Everything went cold inside. He didn't want to answer, but the call was repeated. His hands were shaking when he pressed reply. Are you still here? The man's voice was even, calm, as if he was talking about something ordinary. We are not in a hurry. Just a reminder, time is running out. David dropped the phone on the table, feeling a chill of fear pierce his chest. It was no longer just an observation, they really knew what he was doing. Suddenly, his webcam turned on. A small green light indicated that it was being filmed. An image of his room appeared on the screen. The camera moved, tracing the details of his workplace until it stopped on his face. The timer on the broadcast has reached the 10-minute mark. A man with a knife in his hands began to approach the girl. She became hysterical, making muffled screams through the duct tape on her mouth. A new message appeared on the screen. "This is just the beginning. Are you willing to sacrifice yourself for her?" David grabbed the phone, but didn't know what to do. Should I call the police? Stop it? Or just close the laptop and forget? But a voice in my head whispered, "If you leave, they'll find you. It won't end that easily." He started when there was a loud knock on his door. "Hey, it's a neighbor. Is everything okay?" The voice outside was familiar. It was the guy from the apartment across the street. David stood up, walking slowly to the door. The knock was repeated, but this time it was muffled and strong, as if someone was hitting with something heavy. His fingers reached for the peephole. He held his breath, but the peephole was blocked by a black piece of cloth or paper. A new inscription appeared on the laptop screen: "We're closer than you think. Your choice will change everything." The timer showed 5 minutes. David froze at the door, feeling the fear constrict him. On the laptop screen, the timer continued to count down the last minutes, and there were thuds outside the door. They were getting stronger, as if someone was no longer knocking, but trying to knock down the door. "David, open up. I know you're there." The neighbor's voice sounded muffled, but with a strange metallic tinge. It wasn't like his usual tone. He walked slowly away from the door, trying not to make a sound. Another blow, and it seemed to him that the door was giving way. Suddenly, the laptop screen glowed bright red. The text appeared on it. "It's useless to run. There is only one choice: to intervene or to watch." In the video, a hooded man stood behind a girl with a knife, touching its blade to her neck. The timer showed 3 minutes. David didn't know what to do. He frantically searched the internet for any instructions on how to hack the site, find an IP address, or at least something that would help contact the authorities. But every time he opened a new tab, a message appeared. "Do you want to play with us, David? Let's see who's smarter." Through his fear and panic, he realized that they knew his name. For a few more seconds, he just sat there, paralyzed with horror. Then, on impulse, he grabbed the phone and dialed the police number. "The police. How can I help you?" "Help me," he managed, looking back at the door. "I'm being chased. I think someone is being killed right now. This is a broadcast." "Calm down, sir. Tell me your address." He started to dictate the address, but the call was suddenly cut off. A message appeared on the phone screen: "We warned you. Now you're a participant." The laptop screen blinked again and the video changed. Now the camera was showing not the girl in the room, but his own apartment. He saw himself sitting at his laptop and heard the muffled sounds of footsteps. They were coming from the next room. He grabbed the nearest object, a lamp, and slowly walked towards the source of the sounds. His breathing became heavy, and his heart seemed ready to jump out of his chest. The bedroom door was ajar. He nudged her with his foot, trying to convince himself that it was only his imagination. But what he saw made him freeze. There was a phone on the bed with the camera turned on and pointed at it. The device's screen showed the same broadcast he had seen on the laptop. There was a note next to the phone. "Welcome to the game, David. You're on our side now." He grabbed the note, feeling the sticky trail of fresh blood on his fingertips. Meanwhile, there was only 1 minute left on the laptop screen. The hooded man picked up the knife and looked directly at the camera. The girl on the chair was struggling, sobbing, trying to escape. David realized that there was no more time to think. He grabbed the phone and dialed the number shown on the broadcast screen. The call went through. David, the voice on the other end, was still flat and calm. "You made a choice. Let her go." "Stop it," he shouted. "I did what you wanted." "Hush, hush. Everything is under control. But you have to understand, every choice has consequences." On the broadcast screen, the man lowered the knife, slowly took off his hood, and David saw his face. It was hidden, but the eyes. The eyes stared straight at him with such coldness that everything went cold inside. "Watch carefully," said the voice. The screen went blank. The next second, the lights in the apartment flickered. The door slammed shut behind him, and he realized that he was no longer alone in this room. The lights in the apartment were blinking more and more often, as if the electricity couldn't cope. There was a faint crackling in the room, as if someone had deliberately broken the lamps one by one. David stood in the hallway, clutching a lamp in his hand, trying to suppress his animal fear. He turned to the door that had just been slammed shut and slowly reached out to open it. But the handle was cold, almost icy, and wouldn't budge. David pulled harder, but the door seemed to be locked from the inside. "Who's here?" he shouted, not hoping to hear an answer. The answer was a light tapping coming from the back of the apartment. It was muffled, measured, and came from around the corner of the corridor where his bookcase was. A crack in the silence was cut by a thin whistling sound, as if someone quickly inhaled air through their teeth. Then a message appeared on the screen of the laptop left in the other room. "You wanted to interfere. But are you ready for what happens next?" David felt trapped. He slowly turned towards the room where the laptop was left, but the footsteps became treacherously loud. The floorboards, which had never creaked before, now made frightening noises with every move he made. He looked into the room. Everything looked the same: the laptop on the table, the notification screen, his empty coffee mug. Only something changed. The air was thick, and the smell in the room became strange, metallic, as if blood had been spilled nearby. His gaze fell on the reflection in the window opposite. A figure stood behind him, barely visible in the darkness of the corridor. In her hand she held something long, like a metal rod. David whirled around, but the hallway was empty. Sweat was rolling down his temples, his hands were shaking, and his thoughts were confused. He understood, whatever it was playing with him on purpose. The broadcast on the laptop suddenly resumed. The hooded man was looking directly at the camera again. He raised the knife, but now he was speaking out loud. "You've become an observer. Now you will see how far humanity can go." The girl appeared on the screen again. Her face was haggard and her gaze was blank. The knife was slowly descending towards her hand, leaving a thin line of blood on her skin. David screamed. "That's enough. Stop it." He hit the table, knocking the laptop to the floor. The screen went blank, but at that moment the phone in his pocket vibrated again. With trembling fingers, he took out the device. It was a video. He opened it. His apartment was on the record. The camera was obviously shooting from the corner where the closet stood. David saw himself standing, trembling, with a wild look in his eyes. But at that moment, a figure entered the frame. She moved slowly, with a kind of inhuman smoothness, and stopped right behind him. The video ended abruptly. "It's impossible," he whispered, clutching his head. Suddenly, there was a loud rustle behind the closet. He turned around, but there was no one there. However, the books on the top shelf were shifted, as if someone had just touched them. There was a piece of paper on the floor, among the fragments of an old frame. He picked it up. It was handwritten on the paper. "You've chosen a road that you can't turn off. They're watching you. They are waiting." Before David could react, the lights went out completely. He was left in absolute darkness, only the phone screen illuminated his pale, frightened face. Footsteps sounded again in the silence. But now they were closer. They sounded right from the room where he was. "Who's here?" he shouted, but his voice trembled treacherously. The footsteps stopped. A message appeared on the phone screen. "Welcome to the circle. We are close." Suddenly, someone put a hand on his shoulder. David screamed and spun around, swinging the lamp. But there was no one behind. The air was heavy and smelled of damp and metal. His breathing became ragged, and his hands were sweaty and sticky with fear. A new message appeared on the phone screen. "You wanted the truth. She's yours now." The lights suddenly turned on. David blinked, trying to get used to the abrupt change of scenery. The apartment looked different. Things were overturned, and the living room floor was stained with something dark, like dried blood. Words appeared on the walls, written in large letters. "No one is watching for free." He slowly turned his head to the laptop screen, which lit up again. Now he saw himself on the broadcast, his double. He was sitting on the floor, crying and trembling. The camera was shooting from above, as if someone was watching him from the side. "It's impossible," David whispered, but deep down he knew it was pointless to argue with what was happening. The doppelganger on the screen suddenly raised his head. His face twisted in wild horror. He was shouting, waving his arms as if trying to push something away. At that moment, the camera shifted again, and the figure became visible on the video. She moved smoothly, her silhouette was dark, her face was hidden by a hood. The figure slowly approached the doppelganger. "No, it's not me," David shouted, retreating to the wall. But the screen continued to show terrible things. The hooded man took out a knife and struck the first blow. The doppelganger in the video screamed and fell to the floor, clutching his chest, and the figure slowly raised the knife over and over again, methodically completing what he had begun. David wanted to close his eyes, but he couldn't. His body refused to obey. He seemed to be attached to this place, as if the apartment itself would not let him out. The screen changed again. Now he was showing the door of his apartment. Someone was standing behind her. Heavy breathing came through the laptop speakers, as if filling the space around. A knock. David trembled. A knock. A knock. He took a step back, almost losing his balance. The door opened slowly, although the lock was closed. The light from the hallway entered the room through a crack, and a shadow appeared in the doorway. "David," said a familiar voice, but it sounded like it was coming from both far away and inside his head. "You made a choice. You're one of us now." The figure entered the room, and the door slammed shut behind it with a deafening crash. David looked around in panic, but there was no way out. He could only watch as the dark silhouette slowly approached. When the figure stopped in front of him, David realized that this face was hidden not by a hood, but by something that resembled a mirror surface. And in that mirror he saw himself, the one who had just died in the video. The last thing he felt was cold metal piercing his chest. An icy pain gripped my body. When it was over, the apartment was plunged into silence. A new timer appeared on the laptop screen. 59 minutes and 59 seconds until the next broadcast. And the camera was now showing an empty room. In a nearby apartment, on the street or in another corner of the city, someone opened a laptop by entering a query on a dark website. The timer has started a new countdown.